look for correlations amongst. Some of these new streams are here on the left in the green: genomics, SNP mutations, structural variation, and epigenetics. The microbiome, the Human Microbiome Project has finished recently. Transcriptome of RNA profiling, the metabolome, proteome, the diseaseome, and the environmentome. These new, and I've indicated which are consumer available with a check mark, and therefore we're able to include in our studies readily. We integrate these with the traditional data streams of health history and standardized instrument response, and then the new kinds of quantified health data streams. And I'd like to mention in particular biosensors as one of the biggest coming areas that people may not realize is on the horizon, that the new platform of wearable electronics is just around the corner. Already in 2007, there were more devices on the internet than humans, and in 2020, there are estimated to be 50 billion internet-connected devices. How many people have ordered a Pebble watch? Nobody. Well, the smartwatch platform is a very quick emerging platform with products coming out this fall. The basis is the health version of the smartwatch platform, and the Pebble Watch and WIM Labs and Sony Watch, and there are many, many different products in this category. Similarly is a smart ring, also internet connected with information. And wearable disposable patches. Here picture the electronic tattoo from MC10 and the $1 API for the bloodstream from Sano Intelligence. Already we are starting to have wearable electronic t-shirts that give us biometric data, and dried blood spot lab testing that is much easier than having to go to a licensed phlebotomist to obtain a blood test. In the comfort of your own home, you can prick your finger and measure 20 different items on a regular basis in a much cheaper way on a dried blood spot card. Also, we're already familiar with the continuous glucose monitoring kinds of solutions that are a smaller portable wearable electronic. In addition to the smartwatch, smart ring, and wearable electronics, it's not just about biometric data, but neurometric data. And this is finally a way that we can start to address the brain in a new way, with 24/7 wearable EEG rigs, eye tracking and emotion mapping, and augmented reality glasses like Google Glass coming out also this fall. What's important from a health study perspective is not just the autonomy and agency that everybody will start to have for personal health monitoring and intervention, but also the ability to collect objective metrics on areas where we were previously restricted to self-reported data only. So now moving to some of our specific studies. One of our studies is a memory study that we're operating in collaboration with Armin Schneider, who is one of the world's leading memory experts in Geneva. The study looks at how quickly the brain updates a mental model when physical reality changes. We run this study and all of our studies on the Genamira platform. This is sort of like eBay for health studies, where anybody can post a study and access what is currently a 1,000-member community of individuals who would like to share their genetic data and participate in studies. This is the user interface for the study. It's very clean and user-friendly, and indicates that we're looking for a few different genomic variants, and what the required tasks are, in this case, completing a memory filtering task and entering some some demographic data. The study currently has 58 data participants and 14 discussion participants, as we realize that we'd like to accommodate different tiers of privacy and participation as individuals feel comfortable. We have a total of 13 studies in open enrollment. I have a handout discussing them all here, and they're all available from our homepage, DIYgenomics.org. Some of our newest studies involve sleep, empathy, the microbiome, and diabetes prevention. In all of the studies, with our modular data stream approach, we're looking at some sort of human genetic SNPs, possibly together with the microbiome sequencing, then some sort of standardized, accepted academic questionnaire, and potentially blood test results. In the case of diabetes, hemoglobin has been recently found to be 10 years predictive of diabetes onset. And so if you have a high risk profile for diabetes and a high hemoglobin level already, then you might really be interested in the intervention. Further, we have additional studies with new collaborations that are in design, dealing with predictive risk profiling in the immune system and the diseaseome, looking at body burden with an environmentome study, and cancer risk and drug response prediction. On the mental performance side, genomics are also very interesting, with some new studies that we're looking at that deal with quantified creativity, learning, and flow state management. These also relate to an interventional platform we're using in our empathy study, where we link genomics with response to a standardized instrument. And unlike any other studies, we actually offer an empathy-building intervention. And we do this with a personal virtual coach that texts you 2 messages a day in a micro-communication format that are designed to improve your empathy. It's open to anybody. And then another, in our diabetes prevention series, we have a planned study linking preference for sweet foods with genomics. So as I look out at the future of Health 2050, the realization of preventive medicine, I see the ecosystem in a much broader way with many more different kinds of players. These could be distilled into 3 tiers, with the individual at the center, and then surrounding the individual, a continuous personal informatics health monitoring climate that we get from our biosensors, our neurosensors, and our mobile app platform. This is an ambient information layer that makes suggestions to us in real time regarding our health and well-being and really physical and mental performance optimization capabilities. Then the second tier around ourselves is that of peer collaboration and health advisors. These are new categories of activities where we have our health interest communities online with whom we participate in quantified self-type studies to evaluate different kinds of interventions and track the areas for which we have risk and try to diminish that risk, together with new kinds of job categories like the health and wellness advisor. Third, we rely on the traditional public health system, which has a deep expertise and intelligence in exactly the areas we would like for diagnosis and responding to acute and traumatic care. We've been covered in both the mainstream as well as the academic press, and I would like to acknowledge my collaborators and look forward to dialoguing with you about our activities. Thank you.
I'd like to ask the panelists to come up, please. So I have 3 questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience until 8:15, and then Jeff has his demo. So I'm going to kind of work backwards through the panelists. This notion of genomic literacy. Oh, sorry. The notion of genomic literacy. Melanie, what are some things that we as neoliberals can do to help spread the literacy?
I think people have a fear about sort of this big data era that we need to know and understand and comprehend all of it. And I think genetic literacy and data literacy more broadly are not a challenge. That what happens is any kind of complicated information is packaged for the different audiences. So in the case of physicians, these are highly intelligent people that have 200 hours of continuing medical education per year. And so now that the FDA has validated genomic testing for 100 different drugs, we're starting to see physicians becoming more educated on what our public health system considers to be the most relevant genomic tests. In regard to individuals, it's just like a blood test. The 23andMe has done a lot in terms of making genomic information consumable. And just like a blood test result shows you the range and whether you're in it or not. So the information can be distilled into consumable, actionable items, and a number of players in the industry are trying to do this.
And what are some of the strategies that you, that companies have employed to drive physician adoption? What are some of the barriers you're seeing, and what are some examples of things you've done to help overcome that?
I can comment that, initially in breast cancer, I think, connecting to the patient groups in particular, breast cancer advocacy is such a big outpouring, so working with the Susan Komans, just a ton of different groups that are out there. So making information available on the web, I think the comments around, the Google search and so forth is certainly real. But it's also really getting the education to the physicians so that they're in a position ahead of time to be able to respond appropriately and be able to help guide some of the decision making around interpretation, I think, as a result.
Yeah, I would say in primary care, it's a bit of a different challenge, right? I think, specialists potentially have a bit more time and interest in really educating themselves, and as all of us know, primary care physicians have more than their share to do. So it really is about trying to find folks who, have the interest in it and have then the ability to then work this new thing into their office, process, and infrastructure. And finding, while there are an awful lot of primary care physicians out there, finding who those right people are is takes some time and focus.
Yeah, just the one comment I'd also make is that if what you're doing is something that's really new for the physicians, then you may have a two-step process of even needing to educate them why they need what you've got, and then that you have the right product for that need. If you sort of try and skip over the need part and just say, I have this great product that's going to help you do X, but they don't actually believe they need it, it can trip you up. And so I think that's one of the challenges for some of these things, is they're really first in class, the first time we've ever been able to measure something, and that requires an extra education process.
So how are some of you dealing with the issue of what Steve Earle calls perverse incentives? So physicians are basically reimbursed for doing these tests that you talked about. So if they're suddenly not going to be able to do them, but it's going to be a better outcome for the patient, how do you address that?
I'm the first one to say I wish we had the answer. We don't. The reality is that our test is sort of a classic disruptive kind of test when you think about the cardiology arena, because we truly are taking money out of their pockets. That's not to say cardiologists run these tests only for the money. However, there is absolutely a financial incentive for physicians. And so I think we've spent some time focusing on cardiology from an advocacy standpoint, but I think increasingly we're finding that primary care, at least initially, may be a better group to focus on from an advocacy standpoint, particularly as we think about accountable care organizations and the ability to maintain a patient within the primary care physician's care for a longer period of time. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, I can comment, certainly in the area of what we've done in cancer, dealing with a diagnostic for a physician to order it, so that then they don't go through and provide chemotherapy treatments, which is really a big source of revenue early on, was a bit of a challenge. In some ways, I'm pleased to report less so than you might suspect, that really, many of the early adopters were really focused on what's the best outcome for patients, and they knew the literature. They knew that they didn't have a way to determine which patient benefited, which ones didn't. And, just to be empathetic to their situation, when they've had a patient that for whatever reason didn't want to have chemotherapy, and then it turns out a year or two later that they chose in support of the patient to not give it, and then they recur with metastatic disease, by which point there is no cure in breast cancer, that really is an indelible kind of memory for an oncologist. So, I think being empathetic to the situation that they face, in addition to being able to then provide the data that they have confidence to make the right decision, because it isn't about really withholding therapy, it's getting therapy to the patients who will benefit and not over-treating those who get minimal to no benefit. But it's always an ongoing, discussion on that.
Alex, anything to add to that?
What we do doesn't necessarily rule. I think we're finding right now that just really we're in the business of providing better measurement. And so far, for all the parties involved, patients, physicians, payers, even pharma, they all agree better measurement is a good thing. In some cases, maybe it means that someone would be in remission, maybe eventually we'll be able to take people off of drug for that. But right now, there are a lot of people who don't go on a biologic because they think that maybe, it's got all these risks, but they're not appreciating how severe the disease is for them. So right now, everybody seems to think that more measurement is a good thing, but we'll see longer term if we run into those issues.
And I have, in the vein of innovative cost models and the reticence to pay for anything health-related, a lot of people don't realize that you can actually order your 23andMe data with HSA dollars. So this is a new kind of, over 50% of employers in the U.S. have HSA-type programs, and a number of different kinds of wellness initiatives like 23andMe data, genomic counseling, et cetera, can be paid for with HSA dollars depending on the program. So that's another possibility when you start thinking innovatively about supporting the cost of preventive medicine.
That's great. Okay, I'd like to open it up. Okay, please.
Thank you all for a very nice presentation, and for Rhonda and Meetup to organize this. I think I'm showing empathy here too, so that's good. But as a follow-up question, so there is a cost to developing these things. So clinical diagnostics, biomarkers, whatever the timeline may be, whatever the cost may be, less than developing a big pharmaceutical drug and whatever, but there's a cost. So that cost has to be reimbursed in some way. So I can understand from the US healthcare system, but how do you see these applications to the rest of the world?
Good question.
I can comment for in terms of what we're doing. We're working hard to provide access to patients and healthcare systems. I think the challenge is when you start looking at large markets where their total economic system doesn't allow for it, can quickly become something where it's private pay only. With that said, we have invested a lot in markets like Mexico, in which we did several hundred patients studies to be able to provide information to the INCA, the National Cancer Institute, to look at this data. And their focus, of course, is in the invasive node positive market, in which those patients almost always get chemotherapy, and some get even much more kinds of costs and impacts to the healthcare system. So we do a lot of work and studies to help provide it, but it's absolutely a challenge in the majority of markets outside the U.S., in particular around making it accessible, for patients. It's working with the governments, it's providing studies and tests, and collecting the data and showing outcomes, and also showing the impact for so many women who are caregivers, who are missing out time with work and their family. So I think it's an ongoing struggle.
Okay, please. Sako. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a comment for the Cardio DX. I was wondering that if you can utilize utilization management system already in place by health plans. Many cases when you have to order like radiology test or angiography, it has to go to the pre-auth system, and CareCore or NIA, they already got the system with health plans to give pre-authorization. And once that is in place, primary care physician has no other choice than going through the pre-auth process. Mm-hmm. And if we could make your system as part of the pre-auth to order like nuclear test, then it would just immediately be in place for the primary care. So it's just an idea.
No, I think it's a very interesting idea. We've begun to talk to payers about prior authorization, sort of in a number of different forms, but I think you're absolutely right. That's really where we see the utility of the test, is what we call a gatekeeper to nuclear stress testing. So try this first so that you can rule out a significant number of patients, and working with the health plans to make sure that's the first thing before they go to a nuclear stress test, I think is a great thought.
Yeah, good.
Excellent. Any other questions? Oh, sure.
So I think one concern doctors might have in using new tests is the standard of care, meaning that new tests, but they might be liable to lawsuits because the new test isn't in the standard of care. So do you see that as an issue in getting doctors to adopt new technology?
Absolutely. We do. We hear physicians say, but if I have a picture, then I'm more certain because the picture is what I'm accustomed to. So there's certainly the whole medical legal aspect of uptake of these sorts of tests, and we hear that as pushback. I think, the data that we share with them is some of what I shared with you, the negative predictive value at 96%, and we've demonstrated that in another trial as well. And so, I would expect it takes time, as any standards take time to implement, but absolutely that's a barrier to initial uptake.
One thing I'll just mention on that, which is interesting from my perspective, is early on we thought that would certainly be an issue where people would withhold treatment based upon the data, and we never really had any legal issues associated with it. What became interesting over the last few years is it's actually reversed, in which, because now we're established in guidelines, there have been cases in which patients receive chemotherapy, have adverse events, and then they were not tested ahead of time to find out whether they would have received any benefit. So I think as society evolves and as we better understand the power of genomics and validated tests, there becomes a question of whether you're doing it too soon, or if you're choosing to act and give treatments that aren't providing benefit in patients when there's an opportunity to avoid it.
Great, okay, thank you very much.